SBMM white paper number 2. So Call of Duty put out a blog post in addition to a new white paper. And for those of you who did not get bullied in school, a white paper is like a super technical, like, you know, paper, I guess, with lots of words, big words, and intimidating words.
Oh, way too many words.
That we will not be reading. It's complicated. There's graphs, there's stats, there's words like delta and standard deviation and all kinds of complicated, scary things that we will absolutely not be reading. However, luckily for you guys and us, they also put out a little blog post kind of summarizing what the white paper basically says. We're also not going to be reading that, to be clear. We're also not reading that, but we're going to select a couple little key takeaways from it. And we're basically going to give you the TLDR and our thoughts on it, because a lot of people have been talking about this. We figure we'll throw our hats in the ring. Although, like, JGod put out a video, I watched it today, on this topic, and he kind of echoed a lot of the things I already felt. I have a couple other thoughts that he didn't mention that we'll get into. But yeah, they write a lot of words, big words. Matchmaking series, the role of skill in matchmaking. So they talk about how connection is king, they're lying, but also there are a bunch of other factors to determine what kind of lobby you get into in multiplayer. By the way, this is technically about multiplayer matchmaking, like unranked multiplayer. That's technically what what this is about. But this almost certainly also applies to Warzone. There's no reason it wouldn't. It would just be some variables would be slightly different. Obviously, there are 120 people, not, 12. But it still obviously applies to Warzone as well, insofar as it's applicable. So anyway,
yeah. I was thinking maybe they're just saying, multiplayer because like they're multiplayer games, but it does say right here in core multiplayer. So yeah. But yeah, it'd be the same thing for Warzone.
Yeah. So again, they write a lot of words, big words. And what I mainly want to talk about is this. As our technology and expertise has evolved, our team has increased our matchmaking tests and analyses over the last 5 years, always working to provide the best experience for players. For example, one study focused on Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 conducted across North America. So this year in this game, compared a control group of players without any changes to matchmaking to players who experienced loosened skill consideration in matchmaking. So basically, for however long the study took place, I don't know if it says it in the white paper, but it doesn't say it in the blog post. I'm assuming they did this for like a week. They took a control group of players and they loosened SBMM for those people. And here's what they say. The test showed that players with a wider skill gap were more likely to quit matches in progress and did not return to the game at a higher rate than players with unchanged matchmaking. Read about this test and more here, whatever. Here are a few summary findings that impacted the overall community. So here are the 3 things that I wanted to talk about. So the first one is, as a result of this test, here's what they found. Increased match quit rates. The likelihood for a player to quit during a match increased significantly across 80% of players within the study. Okay, so here's what I wrote. I'm just going to read exactly what I wrote. Doing this test for a week, or however long they did the test for, is not going to give you representative results of how loosening SBMM long-term would impact player behavior. Players have been conditioned over the last 5 years of having strict SBMM to never facing anyone good ever if they are average or low skill. So of course, if they get into some anomalous lobby where there are actually really good players on the other team, they're going to leave, but that's because the system has conditioned them this way because they know that's an anomaly, so they'll back out, queue into another lobby, and there won't be a good player on the other team anymore. If I'm trash and I'm getting rolled, but I know that this is a fluke since SBMM is otherwise so tight, of course I'm going to quit and re-queue more often because I know my next lobby, again, is going to be very likely to not have any demons in it. But if SBMM is always loose or not always non-existent, then eventually I'm going to learn that quitting out when I see a good player is not going to work for me, because there's always going to be a good player in my lobby. I'm going to have to figure it out. And eventually I'll just stick it out and actually try to improve or get better, like we all did in old Call of Duties before MW 2019. Not to mention, by the way, if you removed SBMM but did strict team balancing, that would mean a low-skilled player would be facing a really high-skilled player, but they'd also have a really high-skilled player on their own team to counteract that. So that's number one. Here's the next finding they have. Actually, do you have any comment on their first little point?
No, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah, it's like people, you expect what you've been dealing with for primarily since MW 19 came out. So yep. It's like, yeah, why would, of course you're just going to leave.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then here's their next point. Return to matchmaking. Within the sample study group, 90% of players in the loosened skill group did not return at a higher rate than the control group. So JGod made a very good point on this sentence when he was talking about this. Just because they didn't return at a higher rate doesn't mean they returned at a lower rate. So it's pretty sussy that they said that. Because that could mean, that very well could mean that they returned at an equal rate to the control group, which is to say the group with normal SBMM.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
True. So, and in fact, that probably is what that means.
That's what they do. They use very specific words to get around. Like, it's the same thing when it comes to their, like, shareholder meetings. The way, like, there's always an increase in something, or, they can always make something sound really good on paper, but leave other really bad things out that, of course, they're not going to talk about. And this seems like one of those things. Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
It's a great point, and I didn't even catch that, which is a shame, because my roommate spent a lot of money on a college education in philosophy. I'm supposed to catch things like that. I did not. But Jay got pointed out, and I was like, oh, you're right. Yeah. Sneaky little tactic.
Sneaky dogs.
If it was a lower rate of returning to matchmaking in the loosened SBMM group versus the normal SBMM group, they absolutely would have said that.
Certainly. Yes, they would. Yep.
There would be no reason for them not to, because they're trying to justify why SBMM is the way it is. But since they didn't, it's very likely that this just means equal, basically. But they want to imply that it actually means lower. That's what they're doing. And Activision loves doing this. Lies by omission, lies by cherry picking, lies by sneaky language. I mean, this is, anyway, we'll talk more about that at the end. So they go on. This indicated that low to mid-skill players left the game in greater numbers. That's actually not what it indicates, for the reasons we just said. The net effect of this was a decrease in the overall player population across the study group. Therefore, the likely result of this compounding over time will lead to player populations that feature only higher skilled players at increasing rates. Okay. So let's assume that in the normal SBMM, or the loosened SBMM group, people were leaving the game at a greater rate than the normal SBMM group was. Let's assume that's what they meant, because it actually does sound like they're implying that with the next sentences. I don't really know. But anyways, this is only true if you assume the behavior of low-skilled players during your 1 week or however long test could be extrapolated to how their behavior would be if loser SBMM was always in effect, which it wouldn't be for the reasons mentioned in the last point. Also, how does this account for the fact that in every Call of Duty prior to MW 2019, which is the current iteration of SBMM, plenty of bad players played those games all the time also? How do you explain that?
Yeah.
In similar numbers, by the way. Also, it's not like the Call of Duty player base when COD 4 came out was much smaller than it is now, or MW 2. I would argue maybe at some points it was actually higher if you counted all the platforms in both cases. So how do you explain terrible players playing the game then when you didn't have SBMM at all like you have now? You really only had team balancing. But again, yeah, like if you're just doing this test for a week, again, you've conditioned all of your players to never face a good opponent. So if I'm low skilled and I see a really good opponent and they're like destroying me, yeah, I'm going to leave and just re-queue because I know that my next lobby won't have a good player in it because I know SBMM exists. Or that's been my experience, even if I don't know it. But that's only because I know how that works, and that's how the system works and has worked for years now. If you just turned it off long term, people would return to matchmaking more again, even if your little 1 week test showed that they left at a greater rate and didn't come back. It doesn't matter because you can't extrapolate this behavior if you only do a 1 week test. So,
yeah.
And then the last point I think is their weakest point, blowouts. Matches where blowouts, a score delta greater than 30, meaning one team is winning by 30 or more, increased across all skill levels in TDM as one example. This is just bad team balancing or bad luck, frankly. If one team is getting completely shit pissed and farted on, it's because you've put most of the best players on one team, and that shouldn't ever happen. If you split the best players in the lobby up evenly, this will usually not happen. This is obvious, by the way. Like, one good player is not going to constitute a blowout TDM match where you're losing by more than 30. That's not how that works unless he's the only really good player in the entire lobby. And that's only possible when you have strict SBMM and that guy is reverse boosting and stunting on all the paraplegics. That's what happens. Or quadriplegics, actually. Paraplegics can play fine. That's why that exists. So if you have looser SBMM, that means there are going to be at least 2 good players in the same lobby of 12 people. And then all you have to do is split them up. Put good player 1 on team A, good player 2 on team B. And then you do, again, the same way. Rank them by skill, put even seed on team A, odd seeds on team B. You've solved it. Congratulations. That's how it worked in BO4 and every COD game before that, or virtually every one. And guess what? Blowouts were pretty uncommon. The only time there would be blowouts is when you would be 6 stacking. So your entire team is you and your friends, and there's no matchmaking system on Earth that's going to make that fair, unless you put them against another 6 stack, which, to their credit, they try to do. But if they can't do it,
yeah,
then
that is how it would work in BO4.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but so again, like, yeah, blowouts happen more often when you had looser SBMM. That just means and also, you only had a small experiment group where you loosened SBMM. If looser SBMM existed for everyone, there would be more good players in the same lobby mixed with bad players rather than just one guy. So of course there aren't going to be blowouts because you'd split up the good players between the 2 teams. So this is just a terrible point that I don't even understand why they included, frankly. But like, I concede that blowouts aren't fun for really anyone, honestly. I don't find it particularly fun on the winning side, and I certainly don't find it fun on the losing side. No one wants that. So like, that's implicit in what they're saying here. And I agree with that, but loosening SBMM is not causing blowouts. Loosening SBMM for not enough people so that only one good person is in a terrible lobby is what's causing blowouts. But that's because you only loosened SBMM for a couple people. Get a bunch of get 2, 3, 4 good people in a lobby with average or below average players, split them up evenly. You're not going to have blowouts still. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
So, anyways, that's pretty much it. They talk more about, basically they say they tried also the, what do they say? The inverse, of this. So another example was a test to Titan skill in MW3. This had inverse results consistent with the results of the loosening test. Quit rate was down for 90% of players, and we saw other improvements in the experience of low skill players. However, we observed negative impacts for high skill players. As a result, this change was not rolled out as a standard approach. So TLDR, they're not going to loosen or tighten SBMM. Wow, I'm so surprised that that's the case. Duh. And then they say a lot of huge words, massive words, none of which matters. Again, I've read all of this, so I'm just cherry picking what's relevant here. Let's see. Yeah, and then they say if we loosened SBMM based on the results of our test, which caused lower skilled players to leave more and not come back, over time, if you extrapolate that means the only remaining players in your player base are going to be high skilled players, and then loose SBMM is not going to save you because of course you're going to get matched against other high skilled players because we forced all the low skilled players out of the game by having loose SBMM. And again, that argument does not apply. Why were there terrible players playing BO4 and every other older COD game? And also, you only did the test for a week or a month or whatever. You didn't do it forever. So you conditioned your players to just quit and come back on a different day when they can get their SBMM tight again. Yeah. So, yeah. And then there's some FAQ questions, none of which matters. Like,
yeah, that's what I'm reading over. They're not.
Yeah, none of these were
interesting
relevant. This last one was super stupid. Has Call of Duty considered launching a single core multiplayer playlist that does not use skill as a factor in matchmaking? Whoever asked this question is dumb. Who do you think is queuing for this? This would be the sweatiest lobby you can play in Call of Duty. You'd have to do it everywhere or it doesn't matter. This would be a terrible sweaty lobby. So that would not solve the problem or be fun. But anyway, yeah, that was pretty much it on that. So there are a couple other things though on this topic I do want to point out as well. So Charlie Intel tweeted about this and said, Activision revealed the results of the MW3 multiplayer test where skill factor was reduced for 50% of players in NA. Oh, wow. It was reduced for 50% of players. Oh, okay. I still stand by my blowouts point though. The team balancing isn't good if the score delta is greater than 30, period. This chart shows player retention percentage based on skill rating. Lower to mid skill players saw retention decline. Only the highest skill bucket had an increase. So I'll pull that up here. And Nero Cinema had a reply to this tweet, among other people. That was a great point. And I'm going to read. So here you can see the chart. This is difference in players returning within 14 days during the deprioritized skill test. So the only people who were coming back more were the highest skill bucket players, the best players. You can see them here. Now, by the way, let's take a quick look at this graph. This looks like a huge bar, right? Oh, wow, these low skill players are not returning after 2 weeks in this skill test. That's really bad for the game, right? Well, let's take a look at the left side here. Minus 1.75%. People in the second to worst skill bucket fewer of them were returning, but 1.75% fewer of them. Not that much.
Yeah.
Pretty small, actually. Pretty small percentage, first of all.
Very small.
So, again, the graph looks scary. This looks like a ton of people.
They make graphs look
because the bar
scary.
is so huge. Yeah, but it's like, it's not even 2%. So the impact for every skill bucket, marginal. Very marginal amount of more returning players in the high skill bucket. Very marginal amount for the low skill players not returning or returning less often in the lower skill buckets. Incredibly marginal. This is all sub 2%. And for everyone but 2 skill buckets, it's sub 1% difference. In the margin of error, maybe, I would argue. What is the margin of error? They didn't tell us. That's interesting. Almost like they can just lie by omission. Very interesting. Anyways, in reply to this graph, by the way, Nero Cinema tweeted, I might be reading this wrong, but doesn't it show everyone besides the top % of players are all just leaving? Couldn't that just be a case of COD being stale or people not being invested in general, regardless of the test? It sure could mean that, yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, it's likely it means that. Who are the players who are going to constantly be playing the game, no matter what state it's in, no matter how stale it is? The most hardcore, sweaty, no-life kids, who are going to tend to be the high skill bucket kids. Who is casual and not playing, whether there's a skill-based matchmaking test or not? Casuals. who just get bored and go play Fortnite updates. That's just gonna happen anyway, isn't it? So yeah, this could very easily represent people just getting bored with the game and leaving, regardless of the test. In fact, if they didn't do the test at all and they showed us a graph, I would venture to say it would look almost exactly identical. In fact, interesting point and a great point. And who are the people that are most likely to play the game and then not return for 2 weeks? Again, the low skilled players, because low skilled players are casual players, and casual players are never going to constantly be coming back to COD anyway. That's what casual means. They're going to move on to the next game or the next update or whatever. So that was another great point too. So yeah, the white paper was trash, and that was a great reply by Nero Cinema to that little graph. So there's a lot more that could be said about this, but I'm going to kind of sum up with a couple little points here. Also, with SBMM, so the TLDR basically is they kind of tried to gaslight us into saying SBMM is perfect. We're not going to tighten it because that's bad, and we're not going to loosen it because that's bad too. Here's the proof of it. And it was all kind of misleading and shitty. But again, given that SBMM is not changing, how do I play with my terrible friends? I'm above average, and I have friends who are not above average. They're in fact below average. Some of them are average. Some of them are above average. Some of them are far below average. Far below average. What if I want to have a casual game of unranked multiplayer with my shit friend? Well, I don't, actually. Here's the answer. I don't. Because here's what happens. Hey, Billy, 0.7 KD, 0.5 KD, whatever. Invite me to your lobby. Let's play some casual, relaxed, fun, unranked Dom in multiplayer or small map mosh pit, whatever. Okay, he invites me. We queue. The match ends and he has gone 2-60. How's his player retention? How's Billy's player retention? Because you just sodomized his butt for having the audacity to play with one of his friends who happens to be in a higher skill bucket, as you call it, than he is. He's never going to play with me again. That's for sure. He's probably never going to play at all again because he doesn't know how SBMM works. And he just thinks, oh, everyone that plays this game is insane. I'm done. I'm never playing again. So how do you play with your friends of different skill level? Their answer, again, is to just take the highest KD person in there and put you in that lobby. And I've seen this happen over the last 5 years. I mean, dozens of times where I'll have like some casual and we'll like try and play multiplayer and they're like, oh my God, these lobbies are insane. And it's like, yeah, sorry, dude. You get actually different lobbies when you don't queue with me. Like, I understand. I get it. But it sucks for them and it sucks for me. Because what if I want to play with my friend? Or what if my friend wants to play with me? We're just going to punish him because like he has a friend that's better? That sucks.
Yeah. That was the MW3 beta this year. Remember when Ben played with me for a few matches? And then he texted me and he was like, dude, I can't do this. Like, these lobbies are insane. Because Ben, if he were to play by himself with SBMM, Ben would probably be in COD multiplayer like a 0.7 to 0.8 KD. Not that bad at all. He's not terrible.
Yeah, he's not.
But still, just playing with me even, he could not do it at all. He was getting farmed. And he never bought the game, by the way. If he had played the beta with me and enjoyed it and thought, hey, this is a cool game I can play with my friend, he probably would have bought it. Gabe probably would have bought it too. But we can't all play together. It's just not possible. So what do we do instead? We go play Battlefield. Because everybody sucks and there's no skill-based matchmaking.
Right, exactly.
And you get random lobbies or you'll be getting farmed by some guy in a attack helicopter with 200 kills and 4 deaths, and we'll be trying to shoot him down the whole time. And the next game, nobody on their team can even get 20 kills. It's just different every single time, every lobby you get into, which also makes it interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's a prime example right there. Ben never bought the game because of how bad the beta was for him. And he's not the guy that's going to play COD multiplayer alone to begin with, to be fair. But he would have bought it to play with us, and he can't.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's same thing with Warzone. Somebody like them, I haven't asked any of them to play Warzone since 2020 because I know I'm like I even tell them like they talk about like, oh, like how's Warzone right now? And I was like, no, don't. Like we won't be able to play together. Like you will not have fun. You will not be able to learn. You'll never be able to get better. You're not going to do none of that's going to happen because the kids that I'm playing against are in the World Series of Warzone.
literally in the World Series of Warzone. Yes, yeah.
So I'm like, no, it's just don't. This is a horrible game to play with your friends, and we do not play I do not play Call of Duty with any of my real life friends. We play every other first person shooter on the market except for Call of Duty. Yeah, because you can.
Yeah, and that really sucks. I mean, a lot, obviously. It sucks for us and it sucks for them. Because now I can't play with my friends because they don't want to play. And they can't play the game with their friends either because they don't want to play. It's just terrible. So, anyway, another point. This is why people reverse boost and multi-box. So, Nix to lobbies are brought to you by SBMM. It wouldn't make sense. There would be no reason to multi-box if there was not SBMM, but that's why he does it, to get in these terrible lobbies, full of people who are not good, or again, reverse boosting, like, what's the guy's name? What's that Asian guy's name? Makes YouTube videos. He got caught. He got exposed.
Korean Savage.
Korean Savage, yeah. Korean Savage.
Korean Savage lobby.
Korean Savage got caught reverse boosting to get into terrible lobbies so that he could just clown them and get like a triple nuke with no attachment deagle on shipment. Like, that shouldn't be possible. It shouldn't be possible for anyone to do that. But it is possible when and only when you have SBMM, because you can be a really good player, purposefully ruin your skill rating, your hidden skill rating, according to Activision, by reverse boosting, which means you play like 10 games in a row and you just purposely die over and over. So then it puts you in the worst skill bucket, even though you're not a bad player at all. And then you press the record button and say, hey, YouTube, watch this. And you 360 no scope just dunk on grandmas and disabled people. How's that lobby, by the way, ruined? I mean, completely ruined that lobby. And the only reason that's happening is because you have really strict SBMM. Whereas if you had loose SBMM, Korean Savage would be against those people sometimes, but those people would also have another Korean Savage on their own team because there would be random assortments of skill level players in the lobby, and then you could break them up between the two teams and it would be pretty fair. Most of the time, which is what we all experienced prior to MW19 in multiplayer constantly. So yeah, if Nix to lobbies offend you, if VPNers offend you, if reverse boosters offend you, none of these things would make any sense to do and no one would do them, and they would have no effect if it were not for SBMM. So keep that in mind. And then last point, to be clear, we just wasted your time. Oops. Because none of this matters. Absolutely none of it matters. They could be lying, first of all, although I doubt they are. They could be purposefully obfuscating with misleading stats or by cherry picking what data they show and don't show, which they absolutely are doing, to be clear. And most importantly, they will not change how SBMM works, no matter how much you whine or mauled or I do or anyone does. The only thing that's going to have them change their matchmaking system is if they think whatever change they are going to make is going to earn them more money. That's all they care about. That is all they will ever care about. Frankly, that's all they should care about. I don't necessarily blame them for that, but I just think they're wrong that this is making them more money than having looser SBMM. I think they're just wrong about that. But that's not what their data shows. And there is like some common sense to why they're doing what they're doing and them thinking that makes them more money. And it is hard to run studies on this because, again, running a 1 week study is not going to give you representative results. You'd have to run it for a long time. But they're not going to be willing to do that. And like, I understand that. And they might not even realize that they need to do that to get representative results for the reasons we talked about earlier. But all of that is to say, SBMM is not going anywhere. It's not changing in any meaningful way, probably ever. And stay mad about it. No matter how flawed it is, whatever, they're not going to change. They don't care about you. They don't care about the top skill bucket player. You don't represent 5% of their player base. They don't care about you. So it just doesn't matter, unfortunately. They're going to do what they think makes them the most money. And if the results of this white paper were bad for them, guess what they would have done? Not published it. Period. If they couldn't have massaged this with obfuscation and cherry picking in a way that justifies, in their eyes, this SBMM system, they would have just not released it. So like, of course, how many studies did they run and not talk about? You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter, unfortunately. So, yeah.